This morning is unusually quiet. I am watering the flowers in my front yard when suddenly the neighborhood loudspeaker blasts. Resident of number 17, you are in violation of the rules. Yellow flowers are banned in this community. Neighbors turn their heads, curtains pull back, and every pair of eyes lands on me. A bulky man in a fake HOA security uniform marches up, shakes a spray can, and scrawls the word violation in red across my front gate. But he has no idea the man he just tried to humiliate is a former internal affairs investigator. My name is John Harris, 52 years old. I once served as an internal affairs inspector in the police department, spending years digging into corruption and abuses of power within the force. After decades of staring into darkness, I take early retirement, buy a small house in Oak Ridge residence, and plan to live quietly tending flowers, drinking coffee on the porch, and keeping to myself. Nobody here knows who I used to be, and I intend to keep it that way. The one who rules this neighborhood is Margaret Lane, 55, the HOA president. She dresses in stiff, tailored suits, her hair sprayed into a helmet-like shape, her lips painted in a shade of red so sharp it feels like a warning. Her voice cuts like glass. Her smile is calculated, and her eyes are cold with control. She runs the HOA not like a community service, but like her personal kingdom, with rules as weapons. Her enforcer is Tom Reynolds, the so-called HOA security guard. He has the thick neck of a brawler, a cheap uniform that barely fits, and the swagger of a street thug hiding behind sunglasses he never removes, not even at dusk. He thrives on intimidation, and everyone knows it. On the surface, Oak Ridge looks pristine manicured lawns, tidy streets, order everywhere. But underneath, it is a miniature dictatorship. So how do I become their first target? The first fine arrives less than 24 hours after the loudspeaker incident. I open my mailbox and find an envelope stamped with the HOA seal. Inside, printed in bold letters, it reads, "Violation. Unauthorized plants. Fine. $200. Yellow flowers are prohibited in Oak Ridge residence." I stand on my porch holding the paper, staring at the daisies swaying in the breeze. They are harmless, cheerful things, bought from a nursery for $12. Now, somehow, they are contraband. My jaw tightens. A couple walking their dog slows down to glance at me, then quickly looks away as if even eye contact might get them fined. I rip the paper in half, but the sting of public humiliation clings to me like a shadow. The second strike comes only a week later. My son and his family visit for the weekend. We grill in the backyard. My granddaughter chases fireflies with squeals of laughter, and for a few hours, I almost forget the HOA's absurdity. But on Monday morning, another envelope waits in my mailbox. This one reads, "Unauthorized gathering. Hosting dinner without HOA approval. Fine. $150. I laugh bitterly, waving it in the air. My wife looks at me nervously. "They can't fine us for having dinner," she says, though her tone carries no conviction. I imagine Margaret Lane typing this up herself, lips pursed in that shade of warning red lipstick, relishing every letter. The third attack hits harder because it drags my son directly into the crosshairs. He parks his car overnight by the curb in front of my house. The next morning, a bright orange ticket glares from his windshield. Improper parking. Fine. $100. The car sits less than an inch over a faded line, barely visible, but Tom Reynolds struts nearby with his ticket pad like a cop patrolling a crime scene. I walk over, holding the paper in my hand. "Really, Tom? For this?" I ask, pointing at the ground. He smirks, lowering his sunglasses to meet my eyes. "Rules are rules, old man. If you don't like it, maybe this isn't the place for you." His words carry just enough volume to draw the attention of two neighbors watering their lawns. My son clenches his fists, but I shake my head at him. I can't let Tom bait us into a scene, not yet. The pressure builds at the monthly HOA meeting. Folding chairs line the community hall, the smell of burned coffee and cleaning chemicals hanging in the air. Residents gather in stiff silence, murmuring cautiously, as if the walls themselves might report them. Margaret Lane sits at the front table like a queen on her throne, papers neatly stacked, glasses perched on the edge of her nose. When she speaks, her voice slices through the hall. She reviews budgets, scolds a resident about hedge height, then suddenly turns her gaze on me. "Mr. Harris," she announces, her tone dripping with contempt. "Perhaps you should reconsider whether you belong here. If you cannot follow the rules, the solution is simple: sell your house and leave." Gasps and whispers ripple through the crowd. A few neighbors glance at me with sympathy. Others avoid my eyes entirely. I feel the old fire rising in my chest, the one I thought I buried with retirement. But I force my expression calm, offering only the smallest nod. Margaret mistakes my silence for submission. She smiles, satisfied, moving on as though she has already won. That night, I discover fresh graffiti sprayed across my front door in bold black letters. "Leave." The paint drips like blood down the wood. I scrub until my arms ache, but the ghost of the word still lingers, faint but mocking. As I work, Tom Reynolds strolls by with his hands in his pockets. He doesn't say a word, just stops long enough to watch me struggle, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, then saunters off into the shadows. I grip the scrub brush so hard my knuckles turn white. Behind me, I hear my wife's voice trembling. "John, this is getting dangerous." I look at her, at the fear in her eyes, and I feel anger churn deeper than ever. But Margaret and Tom are not done. The following week, I receive an official-looking letter in another HOA envelope. This one is colder, more aggressive. Failure to comply with HOA standards will result in escalating fines and potential property seizure. Continued non-compliance may lead to legal action. I read it twice, then set it on the kitchen table. My wife picks it up, her hands shaking. "They can't do this, can they?" she whispers. I take a slow breath. They think they can. My son slams his fist on the counter, his frustration boiling over. "Dad, this is harassment. We should fight them." I nod slowly, though my voice stays measured. "We will, but not yet." On the surface, I continue to play the role of the quiet retiree. I mow my lawn, water my flowers, exchange polite greetings with neighbors. I do not argue at meetings. I do not protest the fines. I do not call the police. Margaret and Tom believe they are breaking me down, step by step. But inwardly, the gears turn. I begin to prepare the way I once did on the job. A small voice recorder slips into my pocket every time I step outside. A discreet camera watches over my front yard. I start logging every encounter, every word, every petty abuse of power. I speak casually with neighbors, listening carefully as they complain about fees and fines that never make sense. I watch Tom lean against cars and mutter threats under his breath. I see Margaret sign off on invoices that look suspiciously inflated. At night, when the neighborhood falls quiet, I sit at my desk with a cup of cold coffee, reviewing what I've gathered. I scroll through footage of Tom pocketing cash payments from a resident too frightened to question him. I match dates of fines with Margaret's private expenditures. The patterns become clear. The corruption is deeper than petty. Bullying it is systemic, organized, profitable, and I know exactly how to dismantle it. Still, I remain patient. Margaret believes she is untouchable, that her rules and her title shield her. Tom believes intimidation is enough to silence opposition. Neither of them realize that the man they corner is not some meek retiree, but someone who has made a career out of exposing liars and predators just like them. They think they are tightening the noose around my neck. They don't realize I am letting them pull the rope tighter because when the moment comes, I plan to use it to drag them down. Do they really think I am just another weak victim? I start by using the tools I know how to use: observation, record, and patience, because patience is a weapon most people underestimate. I sit in my living room and map the small kingdom Margaret Lane thinks she controls. Who pays what? Who nods when she speaks? Which neighbors flinch when Tom walks by? I compile invoices, match dates, and label them like evidence in a case file. By habit, I date everything down to the minute. I check the little camera on my porch and watch Tom's movements on loop. At first, it's petty harassment. Then it becomes pattern. Then it becomes something else, cash changing hands in a hedge, signatures that appear on two different documents with the same pen stroke. My hands do not shake when I mark the lines. I remember the long nights in the office, the slow unraveling of a lie into confession. The difference now is that the enemy is an entire neighborhood masquerading as civility, and the victims are my neighbors, my family, and myself. I begin to test them, not with confrontation, instead, with quiet pressure. I plant subtle questions in hallway conversations. Did anyone else get one of those parking tickets? I ask. We heard about that on Willow Lane last month, someone answers, and their eyes dart away like a handler afraid of a wire. I offer to help an elderly neighbor sort through HOA paperwork and let her slip the envelope into my bag. It is small things, handshakes, borrowed sugar, casual offers to fix a leaky faucet that let me look closer, that let me get access without sounding like an accuser. Meanwhile, I keep gathering proof. Audio recordings of Tom making threats, footage of him accepting envelopes in the dark, copies of HOA, meeting minutes with line items that never make sense. The deeper I dig, the more Margaret's empire shows cracks. A petty charge here, a phantom contractor there, a bank deposit that lines up with a private trip she took. It becomes impossible to ignore the odor of corruption. Then something happens that both complicates and accelerates everything. My daughter Claire comes to visit. She is not my son's wife. She is my child, the reason I stopped volunteering for dangerous assignments years ago. I have kept Claire out of the neighborhood fights because she carries a life I never asked for her to inherit. She arrives the afternoon I am reviewing a ledger that finally connects Margaret's signature to a shell contractor. Claire drops her bag, kisses her niece on the head, and then meets my eyes in a way that says she sees the tired lines on my face and refuses to pretend she does not. We eat dinner, we talk. She asks questions in that direct way she always has. Later, when she steps outside to talk on the phone, Tom notices. He saunters over, sunglasses reflecting dinner light, and in his usual brutal way, he starts mouthing off about my family being disruptive. I tell Claire to keep it light. I take a breath and try to steer the conversation away, but Tom is hungry for escalation. He leans too close, his words sharp, and then the moment snaps too quick for me to interfere. He reaches under his jacket and pulls out a small handgun, waving it like a threat and barking some claim about resisting enforcement. The whole street freezes. My granddaughter starts to cry. Tom points the gun at Claire, as if she is a trespasser to be taught a lesson. For 3 seconds, the world narrows down to that barrel, to the tiny black hole at the end, to the way Claire's jaw tightens and her eyes go cold in a way I have never seen. Then she does something I did not expect and that changes everything. She drops her shoulders and steps forward slowly, and in a voice that is both low and roofing with authority, she says, "Put the gun down. Now." Tom laughs at first, a short, ugly sound. Then his expression flickers. Claire speaks again, and the sound of her voice is almost a command. It carries a cadence I recognize from tactical briefings, the kind of tone a team leader uses to pull people out of chaos. She follows the command with calm, precise movements. Not her hands up, but an open-palmed approach, reading his body for the moment she needs. People scatter, some hiding behind cars, some frozen in place. The gun wavers. Tom is angry, confused that his theatrics are not producing the expected fear. He raises the pistol again, and Claire steps to the side, closing distance in a way that is economical and lethal in its efficiency. In less than 5 seconds, she disarms him fast. Clean, almost clinical, holds the gun pointed down while she talks him through staying on the ground. There is no sound except the wind and the neighbors' muffled sobs. I sit there like a man waking from a half-remembered nightmare. My daughter is not just the person I raised, she is something sharper, built from training I never fully knew about. When Claire flips the gun away and places it beside Tom, her fingers are steady. She looks at the people gathered, then at Margaret's car idling at the curb, and then at me. "Dad," she says softly but with a weight that shifts the air. "You should have told me sooner." I open my mouth to explain, to say I wanted to protect her, to say I was ashamed of bringing danger into a life she had already risked enough. But she cuts me off. "Not just you," she says. "I've been watching too. I know how these small men buy power." In that moment, What they think is their victory, their intimidation, becomes the evidence that breaks them. A gun, wielding thug in front of 19 witnesses, a tactical commander calmly securing a weapon, neighbors with phones in their hands capturing every second. Claire's presence shifts strategy from slow accumulation to public exposure. We file a police report immediately. I hand over recordings, invoices, and footage while officers take statements. The scene is chaotic in the official way scenes become when truth and showmanship collide, flashing lights, murmured questions, and Margaret's face paling as people reach for their phones and show what they have. Margaret tries to command the narrative, her practiced smile falters as the officer reads the room. Tom is taken into custody on the spot for brandishing a weapon and making threats. The neighborhood that once watched in scared silence now stands in a stunned cluster, some embarrassed, some emboldened. My neighbors, who whispered in hallways now, tell their own stories of payments and fines and intimidation. A few had never wanted to get involved. A few say they feared for their homes. But the proof we bring them, video, audio, paper trails, turns whispers into witness statements. I feel a strange mix of vindication and dread. The plan I am enacting is not about revenge. It is about justice. We do not gloat. Claire does not wave the disarmed pistol around like a trophy. Instead, she stands beside me as we walk into the community hall the next day with a stack of documents and several neighbors at our backs. The turning point is not a single moment of physical force. It is the instant this micro-tyranny meets daylight. And daylight is what corrupt systems cannot survive. Margaret is not yet arrested, but her veneer of control has fissured. People who once nodded at her begin to ask questions during meetings. Tom is in a cell, and his swagger is now just another video clip on a phone. For the first time since I moved into Oak Ridge, I feel like the air has room to breathe. The fight is no longer only mine. It becomes ours. The community hall is packed tighter than I have ever seen. Rows of folding chairs are filled. Neighbors stand along the walls, and the air carries the restless hum of people who sense something is about to break. Margaret Lane sits at the front table in her usual crisp suit, red lipstick painted like a warning flare. She arranges her papers with the calm of someone who believes she still rules, as if Tom's arrest was only a small disruption. She taps her pen against a clipboard and begins the meeting with her usual condescension. She talks about lawn lengths, about a proposed increase in maintenance fees, about enforcement policies that sound more like laws than guidelines. Then she pauses, looks down at a sheet of paper, and raises her chin. "Mr. Harris," she says, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "The HOA has voted. Due to repeated violations, continued hostility, and refusal to comply with regulations, your property is subject to seizure procedures. If you do not vacate voluntarily, we will proceed with legal action." Her words hang in the air like a final verdict. Some neighbors shift uncomfortably. Others look at me with quiet dread. Margaret waits, expecting silence, expecting me to bow or argue fruitlessly. Instead, I stand slowly, button my jacket, and let the room fall quiet. "Margaret," I say evenly, "I think it's time the neighbors hear the truth." I hold up a folder thick with documents, photographs, and transcripts. Behind me, Claire steps forward with a small laptop connected to the projector. The screen flickers to life. Margaret frowns, her lips twitching with unease. "This meeting," I continue, "is not about my flowers, or my family, or so-called violations. It's about what has been happening behind the curtain of these rules." The first video plays. Tom Reynolds, in his uniform, leans against a car. His sunglasses reflect the frightened face of a neighbor handing him an envelope. Tom pockets the cash, mutters about avoiding bigger problems, and walks away smirking. Gasps ripple through the room. I switch to the next clip. Margaret signing 2 different invoices with identical handwriting, both for landscaping services that were never performed. Side by side, the numbers inflate by thousands. A murmur grows into angry whispers. Then comes the audio recording Tom's voice, unmistakable, saying, "You pay me now, or the fines will keep coming. That's how it works." Margaret slams her hand on the table. "This is nonsense," she snaps. "Fabricated. You are trying to smear this association. But before she can launch into another protest, another voice rises. A man stands from the second row, Mr. Lane, her own husband. His face looks tired, beaten down by years of living in her shadow. It's true, he says quietly but firmly. The room stills. I can't stand her tyranny anymore. I've seen the accounts. I know where the money goes. He steps forward, pulling out papers from his coat. These are copies of bank statements, funds meant for community projects transferred into her personal account, trips, jewelry, cash withdrawals. She has stolen from every one of you. Margaret's face drains of color. You traitor, she hisses, but her voice no longer carries authority. Neighbors rise from their seats one after another. Mrs. Hahn, the retired accountant, lifts a folder of her own. I kept records. The numbers never matched. Millions embezzled from our funds. She lays them on the table beside mine. Another resident speaks up, his voice shaking with anger. She fined me for painting my fence. Said it didn't match code. I paid because I was scared of losing my house. A woman near the back adds, Tom threatened my husband in the driveway. We gave him money just to keep the peace. Voices overlap, louder and louder. The fear that once silenced them transformed into fury. I raise my hand for calm. This is not about revenge, I say. This is about justice. This community has been manipulated, intimidated and robbed, and it ends tonight. At that moment, Claire steps forward and addresses the crowd. Her voice carries the authority that silenced Tom days earlier. Every piece of evidence here has been verified. The police have copies. They are on their way. Margaret tries to gather her papers, muttering about lawsuits, about slander, but the sound of sirens cuts through her words. Red and blue lights flash through the hall's windows. The doors open, and uniformed officers step inside. The room falls silent as the officers move forward. One reads from a warrant. Margaret Lane, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Tom Reynolds is already in custody. Gasps erupt again, followed by a swell of relieved murmurs. Margaret rises to her feet, her composure cracking. You can't do this to me, she shrieks. I am the president of this association. The officer takes her by the arm, guiding her firmly toward the exit. Her crimson lipstick is smeared now, her hair slightly undone. The image of control is shattered. Neighbors watch, some with satisfaction, some with disbelief, but none with fear anymore. As Margaret is led out in handcuffs, Mr. Lane lowers his head. For a moment I almost pity him, but then I remember the years of silence he allowed. Still, his testimony matters. He looks at me with weary gratitude, as though freed from a long prison. Around the hall, neighbors begin to speak openly, no longer whispers but stories tumbling out. They recount years of harassment. Fines for children's toys left on porches, threats for decorations deemed inappropriate, bogus violations for gatherings, arbitrary fees that drained their savings. The more they speak, the more they realize they are not alone. The officers take Margaret away, and the hall fills with something new hope. People turn to me, to Claire, to Mrs. Hahn, asking what comes next. I tell them the HOA will be restructured, that transparency will be the first order of business, that no one will ever again use rules as weapons here. My words are met with nods, with applause, with tears. Neighbors who once avoided my gaze now grip my hand firmly. I see the weight lifting from their shoulders, a collective exhale after years of quiet suffocation. And as I stand there, folder of evidence still in my hands, I realize this is more than a personal victory. It is a reminder that power only exists when people surrender to it, that silence feeds tyranny, and that one person willing to resist can spark an entire community into action. Margaret thought she ruled a kingdom. Tom thought intimidation would keep everyone silent. But tonight proves them wrong. Justice does not always come swiftly, but when it does, it lands with undeniable force. The tyrant is exposed. The enforcer is in chains. And for the first time since moving into Oak Ridge, I feel like this neighborhood belongs to the people who live here, not to the ones who exploit them. The weeks after Margaret's arrest feel like waking from a bad dream. For the first time since moving into Oak Ridge, I walk through the streets without feeling eyes tracking me from behind curtains. The graffiti is cleaned from my front door, the fines vanish from my mailbox, and neighbors greet me not with nervous half-smiles but with genuine relief. Word spreads quickly. Margaret faces multiple charges: embezzlement, fraud, extortion, and Tom is held without bail for assault and illegal possession of a firearm. The local paper runs the story, splashing their names across the front page. What once felt like a personal grudge between me and a corrupt HOA becomes a public scandal. I visit the courthouse for their arraignment, standing in the back as Margaret is led in wearing a beige jumpsuit instead of her usual tailored suits. Her crimson lipstick is gone. Her face looks pale, aged, stripped of the armor she once wore. She scans the room as if searching for someone to command, but no one meets her gaze. Tom follows in chains, his swagger broken, his sunglasses absent. He keeps his eyes down, lips pressed into a hard line. When the charges are read aloud, the list sounds like an indictment not just of individuals, but of the small tyranny they built: extortion, misuse of funds, harassment, intimidation, assault. The judge sets a trial date, and I know justice will not be quick, but it will be certain. Back in the neighborhood, change begins almost immediately. With Margaret gone, the HOA board collapses into disarray. Some members resign, ashamed of their complicity. Others quietly admit they signed documents without reading, pressured by Margaret's threats. A temporary committee forms, and to my surprise, several neighbors ask me to lead the reorganization. At first, I resist. I didn't move here to run anything, I tell them. I just wanted peace. But peace, I realize, is not passive. Peace requires structure, fairness, and accountability. Without it, someone like Margaret will always rise again. At the next meeting, this time truly open, and Democratic residents vote to establish a new charter. Mrs. Hunn, the retired accountant, insists on full financial transparency. Every expense must be published. Every invoice available for inspection. Neighbors nod vigorously. Another resident proposes an end to absurd rules. No more bans on flower colors, no more fines for family dinners, no more intimidation disguised as regulation. The hall fills with laughter when someone jokes about repainting every fence in rainbow stripes. For the first time, the community feels like a community, not a fiefdom. When nominations for new leadership begin, I try to shrink into my seat, but voices rise from every corner. John should do it. He stood up when we couldn't. He knows how to keep things honest. I raise my hands, shaking my head. I didn't ask for this, I say. But Claire leans over, her eyes soft yet firm. Dad, sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted the job. The vote is taken, and before I can protest again, it is unanimous. I am the new HOA president. The title feels heavy, almost ironic. Months ago, the idea would have made me laugh. Now, it feels like a responsibility I cannot refuse. I accept with a nod, promising only one thing: fairness. No intimidation, no hidden agendas, no absurd punishments. Just a neighborhood where families can live without fear of petty tyranny. To mark the change, the community decides on a gesture of renewal. At the center square, where Margaret once held meetings and gave orders, residents gather with shovels and soil. Children run about with watering cans. Adults kneel in the dirt, laughter mixing with the sound of digging. Together, we plant rows of bright yellow flowers, marigolds, sunflowers, daisies the very color once banned, now made into a symbol of resilience. The square transforms into a sea of gold, a living monument to what we endured and what we overcame. When the last flower is planted, applause echoes across the park. Some neighbors wipe tears from their eyes. I stand back, watching as my granddaughter toddles between the rows, her hands brushing the petals. My son lifts her onto his shoulders, and she squeals with joy. Claire stands beside me, her posture relaxed for the first time in weeks. She doesn't flaunt her role in what happened, but I can see the pride in her stance, the calm readiness of someone who has faced worse and walked away stronger. She glances at me and smiles. Not a bad legacy for a quiet retiree, she teases. I chuckle, shaking my head. Not bad for a neighborhood once afraid of flowers, I reply. In the months that follow, life settles into something I once thought impossible here. Neighbors host dinners without fear of fines. Kids ride bikes without being chased down by a thug in a cheap uniform. Residents speak openly at meetings, debating and disagreeing without the shadow of threats. Financial records are posted online for all to see. The word "ho" no longer makes people grit their teeth. It becomes what it should have been all along, a tool for maintaining the community, not controlling it. As for Margaret and Tom, their legacies are written not by them but by the justice system. Margaret is convicted of fraud and embezzlement, sentenced to years in prison. Tom is sentenced for assault, extortion, and illegal possession of a firearm. The news reports paint them not as powerful figures but as petty tyrants undone by their own arrogance. Their downfall becomes a cautionary tale in the city, a reminder that power abused is power lost. One evening I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, the scent of marigolds drifting from the square. Neighbors pass by, waving, stopping to chat. A year ago, I was the man they pitied, the man humiliated in front of everyone. Now, I am simply John again, neighbor, gardener, reluctant leader. I water my flowers, the yellow ones blooming brighter than ever, and I think about the journey from silence to defiance, from victim to witness to voice. Justice, I realize, is not always about punishment. It is about restoring balance, about giving people the courage to stand again. Margaret and Tom receive their sentences, but the true victory is here in the laughter of children, in the freedom to plant what we wish, in the collective strength of neighbors who no longer bow to fear. I watch the sun set over Oak Ridge, casting a golden glow over the flowers. My reflection comes quietly, almost like a prayer. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Sometimes, even a single yellow flower can stand for justice.